Welcome back. Today we're diving straight into something really quite fundamental, mental imagery. That ability you have to recall scenes, faces, objects, basically as pictures inside your head.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're dusting off a really foundational piece of work. It's called Statistics of Mental Imagery. It's a memoir by Francis Galton, and it was published way back in July 1880.
1880. Wow. So this is like really early days for trying to pin this stuff down statistically.
Oh, absolutely. It appeared in Mind, a quarterly review of psychology and philosophy, proper early psychology.
So what's our mission today then? What was Galton actually trying to figure out with this particular study back in 1880?
Well, Galton had this broader aim, trying to map out the natural variations in how people's minds work.
Yeah.
Different sexes, different backgrounds, all that.
Right.
But this specific memoir, it zooms right in on mental imagery. Just how vividly can people conjure up familiar scenes as mental pictures? So we want to explore his initial statistical look at this and some pretty surprising results he got right off the bat.
Okay, mapping the mind's eye. So how did he even start trying to measure something subjective? What kind of questions did he ask?
He started quite simply, actually. He asked people to think about a really common experience at their breakfast table from that very morning.
Ah, the breakfast table test. Okay.
Yeah. And then he asked specific things to try and gauge the quality of that mental picture, like illumination. How bright was it compared to the real thing? Was it clear or more dim?
Okay, brightness, like the lighting in your head, cinema, makes sense. What else?
Then he asked about definition. So how sharp were the objects? Were the plates and the teapot clearly defined, or fuzzy? Were equally in focus?
Right, the focus, the sharpness.
And lastly, coloring. Were the colors right? Were they vivid, natural like the real thing, or kind of washed out?
Brightness, sharpness, color. Seems logical. So he asked these basic questions about breakfast. What did he find? I bet people varied a lot.
Well, here's where it gets interesting. He started by asking his peers, men of science, people you'd think would be good observers.
Yeah, detailed thinkers.
Surprisingly, a whole lot of them claimed they just didn't have mental imagery like he was describing at all. They really struggled with the whole idea of seeing something with the mind's eye.
Wait, hang on. Scientists, people who work with data and observation, they couldn't picture their own breakfast table.
That's what they told him. Galton was frankly baffled. He initially thought it might be some kind of a mental deficiency, his word, almost like being colorblind, but for visual memory.
Wow. A deficiency. That's strong.
He even quotes one of them, a scientific correspondent, who basically said recalling a scene was just a figure of speech for him. He said, "I do not see it, any more than a man sees the 1,000 lines of Sophocles, which under due pressure he is ready to repeat."
That's quite a statement. It's like memory is just abstract data, not a picture. Did Galton buy that, or did he think maybe they just, describe things differently?
It definitely highlights a different way of experiencing memory, right? But Galton didn't stop there. He then asked, people in general society, men, women, boys, girls.
Okay, broadening the sample.
And the contrast was stark. Most of them said, yeah, of course, they saw clear, colorful mental images. It was just a normal part of how they thought.
So the scientists are saying, nope, nothing to see here, while everyone else is watching mental movies. That's a really weird split.
It was definitely unexpected for Galton, and it led him to two sort of immediate takeaways. First, maybe it is actually pretty easy to get statistical insights into people's inner worlds just by asking.
Huh. Okay.
And second, this apparent weakness or feebleness of visual mental pictures, specifically among the scientific men as a group.
Right. Did he have any theories about why? Why would scientists, of all people, report weaker imagery?
He did float an idea. He wondered if maybe being too ready to see clear mental pictures might actually be antagonistic to abstract thought.
Oh.
Like it gets in the way.
Interesting. So focusing on abstract concepts might push visual imagery aside.
That was his hypothesis. Maybe it gets weaker through disuse if you're always thinking abstractly. But he also thought maybe it's compensated for by other ways of thinking, perhaps related to like motor actions or feelings of movement.
Like physically imagining manipulating an object instead of just seeing it.
Something like that, potentially. But it's important to remember this was early thinking. He also noted, interestingly, that even some of the people who claimed they had really poor imagery could still give very vivid descriptions. And some could even become painters. So it wasn't entirely clear-cut. Maybe visualization has different facets.
That's fascinating, the brain optimizing for different kinds of thought. So how did he gather more data on this? Who else did he ask?
Well, To dig deeper, he collected responses from 100 adult men. This included 19 fellows of the Royal Society, so top scientists and other intellectually distinguished people, and also 172 schoolboys from Charterhouse.
Okay, scientists, smart guys, and school kids. Was the adult group representative?
Not exactly random, no. He specifically mentions the adult male sample wasn't a typical statistical group. It was selected either because the individuals were known to have remarkable imagery or because they were part of that scientific community he was curious about.
Gotcha. So he was deliberately looking at the extremes, in a way. And how did he compare these descriptions? If it's all subjective, how do you make statistics?
He used a method he'd actually described earlier in 1875. He called it statistics by intercomparison.
Intercomparison?
Yeah, the idea was to analyze and compare the descriptions people gave relative to each other within the group and sort of rank the vividness without needing some impossible objective measure of a mental image.
Okay, comparing apples to apples within the group based on how they described their experience. So what did this comparison show about vividness?
It showed a huge range, just as you'd expect. At one end, you had descriptions like brilliant, distinct, never blotchy, where people said the mental image was basically as clear as seeing the real thing.
Wow.
For instance, one person recalling breakfast said, "All the objects in my mental picture are as bright as the actual scene, just crystal clear."
Okay, that's the high end. What about the other end?
Down at the other end, you had dim and indistinct. And some people flat out claimed they had no power of visualizing at all.
Really? Zero?
Yeah. One response about the breakfast table was, "My powers are zero. To my consciousness, there is almost no association of memory with objective visual impressions. I recollect the breakfast table, but do not see it."
That is such a stark difference, seeing it versus just knowing it was there.
Exactly. He also looked briefly into recalling color, which seemed maybe a bit easier for people than recalling precise shapes or forms. And another odd finding, he asked about the extent of the mental field of view. And some people actually reported their mental view felt wider than their actual physical field of vision.
Wider than reality. That's bizarre. Our minds are strange places.
They really are. And this was Galton, back in 1880, trying to get the first statistical glimpses into that strangeness.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the main points from this early work. There's this huge variability in how vivid mental imagery is for different people.
Definitely. From crystal clear to basically nothing.
Then there was that surprising initial finding, the skepticism from the scientific community, which Galton wasn't expecting.
Right, the idea that maybe abstract thought and vivid pictures don't always go hand in hand.
And finally, just the fact that he was trying to apply statistical methods to this really subjective internal experience, using things like his intercomparison method.
Yep, pioneering stuff, really. All kick-started by asking about toast and teacups.
Which inevitably brings it back to you, listening right now. Take a second and think about your own mental imagery. When you recall your breakfast, what do you get?
Is it bright, sharp,
Yeah.
colorful? Or is it more like that scientist Galton quoted, just knowing the facts without a picture?
Does Galton's early idea about abstract thought, maybe dampening visual imagery, resonate with you at all? It's fascinating stuff. This work from 1880 opened up these really big questions about how we think and perceive, and honestly, we're still exploring them today.